What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Numberfire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and Numberfire.com, as we are taking a look back at week number 10 of NFL DFS and discussing all the big takeaways and what it means going forward. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for Numberfire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for Numberfire. Brandon, week 10 did not go as expected. I think my worst week of the year so far for NFL DFS, made up for a little bit with NASCAR and betting, but not a great week here. How are you doing?
Can we skip this week?
Yeah.
I don't want to go through it again.
I want to never be reminded of whatever it was that happened with David Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, Jalen Samuels, all the guys that we discussed as being interesting, at least. Saquon Barkley, 13 carries, 1 yard, suboptimal. I've had better weeks. I will definitely say that.
Yeah, when the Saints score 9 points at home against the Falcons, I know I should have probably been smarter and said it's a divisional opponent that's going to get the Falcons to play a little bit better, but a little bit better than dreadful is still very much beatable by Drew Brees and the Saints, but we did not get that.
This team gave up 53 to the Texans. The Texans are good. The Texans are a good football team, but the Saints allegedly are good too. They're good. I'm not trying to, overreact to one game.
I thought this was a Teddy Bridgewater comment.
Oh, no. I gave up that one. I love Teddy. I like Teddy as like a human. He does have the same efficiency mark as Drew Brees for 2019, in case anyone is curious, but we're not going to go too far with that because I have had plenty of bad takes. My Marcus Mariota ones look worse by the day because Ryan Tannehill is playing pretty well, got a big win for Tennessee. Jared Goff sucks. Baker Mayfield had a good day finally, I guess. So it's been a rough year for quarterbacks I like outside of Teddy.
I was going to say it's about time for Blake Bortles to come in and replace Jared Goff. So
I really want
people forget kind of how bad Blake Bortles was. If they're asking if it's time for Jared Goff to move over for Blake Bortles, I think people are.
And they're also forgetting that it's difficult to perform well when you are playing behind a backup center, playing without your right tackle for the latter part of the game, playing without Brandon Cooks, playing with backups at left guard and a terrible player at right guard. Things don't tend to go well on the road against a good defense, but maybe people forget the context around things. Totally understandable. So before I dig myself into a deeper hole, let's move on and talk about the Chargers and the Raiders on Thursday night. The Raiders just keep on winning, Brandon, and it leads to a lot of volume for Josh Jacobs. So what'd you see in this game between two teams that actually played? I thought it was a fun game overall.
Yeah. Just the
outside
Chargers
of Phillip Rivers chucking it to the Raiders defensive backs as often as he possibly could.
Yeah, there were 425 combined passing yards in this game. I'm going to start with the Raiders because they won. Derek Carr was efficient on his 31 attempts, but the targets were spread out. 4 different Raiders had 5 targets: Darren Waller, Tyrell Williams, Josh Jacobs, and Hunter Renfrow. Jalen Richard had 4 and a team-high 43 yards. That's not going to get it done. In 3 games with Tyrell Williams back, Hunter Renfrow, who leads with an 18% target share, that also won't get it done as the lead man, followed by Waller and Williams at 17%, and then Jalen Richard is 4th at 13%. Prior to Williams' return, Waller had a 26.7% target share, so it's a pretty big deviation. It's a decent sample of 3 games. Williams has 37% of the air yards since returning, which is of note. Waller's at 18%, Renfro's at 15%. The deep targets definitely follow, Tyrell Williams. If you're looking for one pass catcher to trust, Darren Waller does not have the role that he used to, but nobody really stands out, and his role is still pretty decent for a tight end. Josh Jacobs, though, as you mentioned, had 5 targets, 16 of 20 running back carries. Played 52% of the snaps, giving him between 52 and 58% in 4 games straight. That's not great, but We've mentioned it before. He's the kind of guy who doesn't need a lot of snaps to get touches. On his 30 snaps, he had 21 opportunities, so a lot of looks per snap, and that helps with the low snap rate. The Raiders host the Bengals next week, a game where Jacobs certainly will be in play if the price is somewhat right. The Chargers, just kind of frustrating. Russell Okung is dealing with a strained groin. He seems like week to week. They did feature Melvin Gordon, who had 22 carries. Austin Eckler had 6. Gordon played 62% of the snaps. Eckler was at 45%, kind of in line with what we saw last week, but with a bump to Eckler, who was in the 30s last week. Gordon, simply put, is the featured back of a committee here. He gets more of the rushing, which is definitely, you make him the priority. Eckler on a full slate is probably not anybody that I would ever play. Phillip Rivers was just awful in this game. He did throw 11 of his 31 passes to Keenan Allen. Hunter Henry had 7 targets. Andre Patton had an empty 4. I mean, he played 81% of the snaps, and that actually gives him 80% or more in 3 straight weeks. So he's been on the field, just doesn't get a lot of targets, but kind of got targets late in the game when it mattered. So I don't know. Mike Williams had 3 targets on 73 snaps. Still has not scored this year. Touchdown regression's coming eventually for Mike Williams. Since their offensive coordinator change, Hunter Henry has a 29% target share. Keenan Allen is at 26%. Mike Williams is at just 12% over those 2 games. Allen's kind of reemerging with an elite target share. Hunter Henry has one of the best workloads among tight ends in all of football. The offense just kind of hasn't been as functional as you would think, despite the weapons. They host the Chiefs on Monday night in Week 11, so they're not on the main slate. So I was actually going to kick it back to you and ask you about Josh Jacobs and how you view him for Week 11.
I think I agree with what you said, where he's not going to play a huge snap rate, but he's on the field and he's going to get carries, and he's going to get all the carries, and he's going to get targets. The 5 targets for him, actually the most he's had in a game all year, and he's effective in that volume he does get as a receiver, and that matters quite a bit. The other good thing with Jacobs is that we've seen him keep a steady snap rate in negative game script, and that was a concern and a negative for him earlier in the year. So I think that he's just kind of confirming what I thought of him before, where what we have thought of him for like the past 6 or so weeks, where he is going to get a ton of early down work. He'll get 4 or 5 targets, and there's a lot of value in that. They're at home against the Bengals next week. They're 10.5-point favorites. Name that salary for Josh Jacobs in that spot.
He's probably like a 7,000. I was going to say 68, but I think 7's probably more appropriate that I would pay.
Yeah. I think that, I guess the way that I view him is like Marlon Mack with additional targets, like 3 or 4 extra targets. And Mack was 74. He was overpriced this week. So I'm not going to base Jacobs off of that. But I think that, because he's an increased version of Marlon Mack, I would say he deserves to be around 74, would be, I guess, my salary for him. And Josh Jacobs is 8,000. So $8,000 is the same salary as Mark Ingram. I think that Jacobs is far more palatable at $8,000 than what Mark Ingram was. It is spendy, but I think because he has such an easy path to a big game, I'm still going to use him in that spot. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I know I just mentioned that his snap rate doesn't matter as much as other running back snap rates, but it's going to be tough. I don't know the full slate yet. I haven't really dug in. But 8,000, and you asked me what I'm comfortable paying for him.
Right,
It's
right.
like low 7,000s. I'd play a lot of them. 8,000, he's got to be up there with whichever studs we have next week. So we'll have to talk probably more about him on Thursday.
Yeah, it's a very high number. And I think that that's appropriate because if he were 7,000 against the Bengals, he'd be a no-brainer. Yeah. So I think that it's a good salary. I think that it's higher than what it should be for his role, but in that spot, it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm probably just coming at it from, having my running backs pan out the way that they did in Week 10. I think I'm just nervous about anybody with any question marks.
No, I think it makes sense because I think that in order to be 8,000, you need a little bit more rushing or a little bit more passing juice. He hasn't had more than 30 receiving yards in the game this year. So, like, I think your concerns are justified. But what we're not saying is that you can't use him at that salary, basically. So he'll be an interesting one. I think that salary is good because it makes it more of a discussion than it would be if he were cheaper. In this week's Number Fire FanDuel free play, MTB Chuck got the win thanks to a Kyler Murray Christian Kirk stack. They also had Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, and Michael Thomas to help put them over the top. For that, MTB Chuck gets a free Number Fire premium subscription along with some cash. The top 3 finishers all got subs, and the top 5 got cash. To get your chance at Number Fire premium and some free cash, make sure to check out this week's preview podcast on Thursday and listen for the URL. And again, to make sure you get all those podcasts, subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review. And you can now watch us live on YouTube, the FanDuel YouTube page as well. So plenty of ways to consume. If you don't want to wait for the podcast to be posted, because I take a little bit to edit, feel free to tune in at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning on the FanDuel YouTube page. Let's move on now to the Lions at the Bears. And Mitchell Trubisky finally played decently well here, but I don't think it's a performance that necessarily makes him relevant for fantasy. He attempted just 23 passes and ran only 3 times. And the big part of the reason we liked Trubisky last year for fantasy was because he was running. That has very much not been the case this year. They don't trust him, and his efficient days are not going to be the baseline expectation. So looks good, but we shouldn't be going back there just yet. And unfortunately, the Bears' lack of faith in Trubisky makes it hard for us to trust his pass catchers. The plus is that the target tree is still pretty concentrated. Allen Robinson had 9 targets and Taylor Gabriel had 6. Nobody else had more than 4. Since Trubisky's return, Robinson has 29% of the team's targets. Tariq Cohen is second at 19%. 12 of those came in one game. Robinson is really the only guy we can go at here. I would say Taylor Gabriel would work if they were to throw a bit more, but that's not something I would count on. I'd rank him above Anthony Miller, given the snap rates they both had the past 2 weeks. David Montgomery kept his early down role and handled 17 of 20 running back carries, but he didn't get a single target. Montgomery had gotten 4 or 5 targets in the previous 2 games, and this is a deviation for him. He ran 14 routes, which was half the dropbacks, which shows you how little they drop back. That's actually more than he ran last week. Montgomery played 60% of the snaps, and considering that they won, I think that's a bit disappointing. I would have expected him to be around 70%. So I would say that Montgomery does deserve a slight downgrade from where he was entering the week, given that snap rate and given the script. But he's still a viable running back as long as you expect the Bears to score points and as long as his salary doesn't get too high. Jeff Driscoll had to start here for Matthew Stafford, and he predictably struggled. He finished with negative 8.14 passing net expected points on 48 dropbacks. It'd be a pretty major downgrade for everyone here if Stafford were to miss more time, which seems like it definitely could happen. They also lost Ty Johnson to a concussion during the game, so J.D. McKissick popped up with 10 carries and 7 targets on 70% of the snaps. He'd likely have a decent volume-based role if Johnson were to miss time, but Paul Perkins would also mix in for the early down work there. Plus, their right tackle, Ricky Wagner, got hurt too, so it's a bad situation here unless Stafford winds up being okay, and it's a broken bone in his back, which sounds not optimal. The heavy volume allowed all the pass catchers to get targets, and Kenny Golladay led the way with 9. If we look at the 6 games where Danny Amendola has had a 50% snap rate, Amendola, Golladay, and Marvin Jones all have target shares between 19% and 20%. So that's annoying, but Golladay has 42% of the deep targets, while Jones is at 28%. So it's still status quo here, I would say. Golladay is a top option with Jones second and Amendola third. But again, if Stafford's not healthy, it kind of matters a whole lot less. Brandon, the Bears are not on the main slate next week, but I still want to talk to you about David Montgomery. I am personally giving him a slight downgrade from where he was, but still viewing him as being someone we can potentially target in DFS. Do you have a differing opinion on him based on this game?
No. The 60% snap rate is not really where you need it to be to kind of put any running back in the conversation where you don't have like red flags about him. At least that's kind of where I am.
Yeah.
And this offense just doesn't score enough. It doesn't move the ball. It's just not consistently, predictably good. So I would probably downgrade him as well. And he was 6,400 this week. So if he were on the main slate, what kind of price are you thinking next week as a
62.
6.5 point road underdog? 62.
Yeah. Well, I guess with my point expectation for the team would be low against Aaron Donald. So maybe 6,000, I guess. Like it'd be hard for me to use him in that spot. It's less because of his role and more because of the spot, I guess, though.
Yeah, it's like I don't even dislike the role so much as the role in that offense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And this offense isn't going to magically get better. Kyle Long is out. Their offensive line has been a major disappointment this year. And Trubisky he played decently well on Sunday, but like, can we expect that in the future? It's hard to tell for sure. So let's move on here to the Ravens at the Bengals. 49-13, the final score here. And Mark Ingram still did not go off, but Lamar Jackson did, Brandon, because he is hashtag good at football. That run was stupid. He's really, really fun.
Yeah, Lamar, 17 pass attempts, which, I mean, he had more touchdowns with 3 than incompletions with 2.
Of course.
He ran 7 times for 65 yards and a touchdown. He's a fantasy cheat code. He's in play pretty much no matter what, even in a potential blowout like this, because we know that he is going to be involved in so much of the offense that if they are in blowout position, it's because of Lamar Jackson. His targets were actually pretty fixated on Mark Andrews, who had 8, including 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. His snap rate's always hovering around 50%, but he has a 26% target share on the season, which is second best among all tight ends. So I like Mark Andrews, even though the price was creeping up quite a bit. After Andrews, Marquise Brown and Nick Boyle had 4 targets. It's not like the best situation for anybody other than Mark Andrews. So I'm a little bit concerned about anyone who is not Mark Andrews in this offense, even Marquise Brown, who has just 44 air yards in 2 games since returning, but an 18% target share. 3rd on the team behind Andrews. Nick Boyle's at 21%. So like this is just not a fun offense for pass catchers. Brown is obviously the second best stacking candidate behind Lamar, but you really don't have to stack Lamar if you don't want. He does have 2 options and really only 2 options. Mark Ingram scored and had 34 yards on 9 carries. It was a blowout. It was perfect script. That's what he gave us. This was the Mark Ingram spot. He was fine, I guess. 48% of the snaps. It's about typical for him. I mean, without the touchdown, like, I don't know. We talked about it a lot. I don't think we need to talk about it too much more. Justice Hill played 26% of snaps. Gus Edwards played 24%. So there's really not a go-to option behind him. They host the Texans next week. They should not be able to take the foot off the pedal, so that'll be fun. For the Bengals, there's not a whole lot here. Ryan Finley was 16 of 30 for 167 yards, touchdown, interception. That was negative 0.65 passing net expected points per dropback, so a 40% success rate. Threw 4 deep passes with no completions. Tyler Boyd had 8 targets for 62 yards. Auden Tate had 6 targets. Tyler Eifert, Stanley Morgan were at 4. Joe Mixon had 3 targets. It's just going to be a very difficult passing offense to love with Ryan Finley, but hopefully Boyd and Tate get fed. That's really all we're clinging to here. Speaking of getting fed, though, Joe Mixon had 30 carries for 114 yards, in addition to 3 targets while playing 75% of the snaps. Giovanni Bernard did leave temporarily, was declared out, and then returned. But this is just going to be a low ceiling offense based on what they showed us on Sunday. They play in Oakland next week, as we already talked about, 10.5 point underdogs.
Let's talk about Lamar Jackson, and I want to talk about his salary, because we don't tend to discuss salaries with quarterbacks that often because they're so tightly grouped. And it makes it hard to really care about salary because there's such a little difference between all of them. But I think with Lamar Jackson, like, you could justify spending a whole lot on this guy, especially in tight scripts. So he's at home against Houston next week. Name that salary for Lamar Jackson in that spot.
He was 86 this week. 9,000.
I think that's appropriate. Probably. He's 88 though. the floor is astronomical. The ceiling is better than the floor. Like if you look at his game logs, he has
Or
had
is it
30 points 4 times. He's
the
had
ceiling is
28 points an additional one.
the ceiling is the roof?
Yeah, like this dude's insane. And Deshaun Watson, they were on bye. He's 82. Like I'm gonna have a hard time just not having lineups that don't have a quarterback in that game. Like that game is gonna be so fun. I think that like it's so hard for me to find a situation in which you would not use Lamar in fantasy. Like tough matchups, who cares? Because the rushing floor is high. Blowouts, like you said, if they blow him out, he'll be a big part of the reason why. It's hard for me to find a path to failure, I guess.
Yeah. I I was stammering because I was adding up the targets in my head, and Robert Griffin came in and threw 5 passes. So, but still, Mark Andrews had 7 of 17 attempts from Lamar Jackson. Marquise Brown had 4. So, like, he's feeding Mark Andrews. So, you like that stack? I'm going to play a lot of Mark Andrews and Lamar next week.
Yeah, and the way that I did it this week was I had like in my Lamar lineups, I had him naked 30% of the time with no stack, 30% with Andrews and 40% with Brown. I'd probably switch that for next week and go 40% Andrews, 30% Hollywood, and then 30% naked. So I think that's probably the way I'll want to play that there. Let's move on here to the Bills at the Browns. And Baker Mayfield didn't put up huge stats, but he played pretty well here, especially considering the matchup. Baker finished with 0.17 passing net expected points per dropback. That is the third best mark for a quarterback against the Bills this year. And he's not a high floor guy by any means, obviously, but once the better matchups come, we will be able to go his way. Kareem Hunt made his debut for the Browns, and he and Nick Chubb were actually on the field together a ton. Hunt played 54% of the snaps, while Chubb's rate actually went up to 81%. Chubb had 20 carries and 4 targets, which is 28 adjusted opportunities, carries plus 2x targets. Hunt had 4 carries and 9 targets, which is 22. Hunt lined up in the slot for 9 snaps, and he was out wide for 5, according to Pro Football Focus. He ran 23 routes, while Chubb ran 27. So I think what we can do here is probably keep Nick Chubb basically where he was before. He will lose a bit of the rushing work, but he's still running routes. That's a major plus, and I think that we can keep him pretty much status quo. As for Kareem Hunt, we'll have to see if the usage sticks, but I think it's really encouraging, and I would expect the targets to come down, but he's far more interesting than I expected him to be. So honestly, I think this is best case scenario for this Browns backfield from a DFS perspective. Outside of Kareem Hunt, almost every other throw went to Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham. Landry had 10 targets, Beckham had 12. Baker didn't throw deep much. His time to throw was 2.21 seconds, so they were just whipping that ball out. And it's led to fewer deep targets for Baker, but 3 of the 4 deep targets were to Beckham. Baker has been throwing shorter basically since week 6 to account for the protection issues. And in those 4 games, Landry has 26% of the targets and Beckham has 25%. Beckham has averaged 2.25 deep targets per game and Landry is at 1. The Browns get the Steelers on Thursday, which is tough. But after that, they have the Dolphins, Steelers again, Bengals, and Cardinals. In the good spots, will want to be in on this offense, and I think that still does include Nick Chubb. Devin Singletary didn't come through for DFS, but he kept the same role he had last week, which bodes well for him going forward. He had 8 of 13 running back carries. He added 7 targets while playing 67% of the snaps. Frank Gore had their 1 running back carry inside the 5, and Josh Allen had another. So the odds you get vultured are very much still there, and that does knock Singletary down. But as long as his salary doesn't get too high, he's very much an option. We just have to keep Gore in mind from a touchdown perspective because that issue will not go away. As for Josh Allen, he scored twice as a rusher, helping save what would have been a bad day otherwise. He has 6 rushing touchdowns this year, but still hasn't had more than 25.44 FanDuel points, and that was what he had on Sunday. The rushing will eventually regress, but it'll also play in tighter scripts to inflate his passing volume. So obviously Josh Allen is an option, but there are floor concerns, and we need to keep those in mind, even with his rushing being a thing we can't expect to continue going forward. For the receivers, it was the same as usual, except Cole Beasley did manage to get 74 yards. That's not something we should bank on. John Brown, though, showed yet again that he has a floor. He hasn't flashed his ceiling yet. But once they get into a tight script and a decent matchup, Brown will do that. He's not someone I've used all that much this year because I do value game environment. But once we see John Brown in a good spot, I will go hard at him. They're facing the Dolphins next week. I'd prefer that Ryan Fitzpatrick start that game, and there may be some questions around that after he was checked for a concussion. But if Fitzpatrick plays, that may be the spot where John Brown finally hits his ceiling. Let's talk here about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Brandon, I am pretty much keeping status quo on Nick Chubb, which is better than I expected. But I also think that Hunt is at least someone we can monitor going forward and potentially use if he's able to keep that passing game work. Where do you sit on those two guys after what we saw in week number 10?
Yeah, so, I mean, this offense clearly hasn't been amazing all season, so they need some people who can make some plays. Kareem Hunt can do that with the ball in his hands, so it was encouraging to see him get those 9 targets, but also not take away significantly, if at all, from Nick Chubb. So they're basically using them kind of independent of one another, which is very promising for me. So I'm, like you, status quo on Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt, though, I don't really think he fits the mold for what I'm looking at for someone who's going to take up a running back slot on FanDuel. I'm not saying he's untouchable if the spot's right, but I mean, for the single game slate on Thursday, like he's got a lot of appeal. But on a full slate, I still need to see more.
I feel like he's like James White. He's got the James White syndrome where like he has a good role and he's going to get volume. And if it were a full PPR site, maybe we go there, but it's not. And I think that the opportunity cost there is a little bit too high. So I think that Hunt is interesting and I'll monitor him, especially if he starts to get some more early down work. But as of right now, it's mostly just that Nick Chubb remains static, which is better than I expected. Let's move on here to the Chiefs at the Titans. Hey, Patrick Mahomes came back, played well. LaShawn McCoy was inactive, which led to a lot of Damian Williams. But Derrick Henry just blew up. I hate this guy. Like, talk to me about this game, Brandon.
Yeah, I had 0 Derrick Henry. That was on purpose.
I had him in game stacks, and that was it. And that was not enough.
Yeah. You can look at me and say that I'm stupid, and I'm sure that I am, but I know why I didn't play Derrick Henry this week. But he showed up, 23 carries, 188 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 targets. So that's, I think, a career high for him. It's not, but I mean, he does everything on the ground, and if he's not scoring touchdowns and breaking long runs, he can bust pretty easily. He's a really easy player to break down. He does have rushing yardage upside because of his volume, but there's just really no passing work. And so unless he scores, we're looking only at rushing yards, which is not a good recipe for high floor and high ceiling for a running back. Ryan Tannehill had 19 attempts here for just 181 yards, but 2 touchdowns. Also ran 3 times for 37 yards. There's no Corey Davis this week, no Delaney Walker. So a lot of people were on Jonnu Smith and A.J. Brown, myself included. Jonnu Smith week was just fine. He did have a team high 6 targets for 30 yards. So the volume was fine, but the action was not. A.J. Brown had 4 targets. He caught 1 for 17 yards. Anthony Ferkser had 4 targets and 1 of the touchdowns. So without Davis or Walker, the team really didn't give anyone a crazy target total because the passing volume was down. It's still promising for Jonnu in games with more passing if Walker continues to miss. A.J. Brown did have 89 air yards, which is fine, but this just isn't and is really never going to be an offense to get overly excited about for DFS purposes. They have a bye this week, so Davis and Walker could be back, rendering all of that useless. For the Chiefs, I mean, they lost. Patrick Mahomes threw 50 times, and if you told me Patrick Mahomes would throw 50 times, I'd probably say he'd have like 600 yards, and not quite, but 446, not bad. 0.47 passing net expected points per dropback, more than 4 times the NFL average, a 58% success rate. He's good. He's back. That's all we need to know. Tyreek Hill had 19 targets, which I'm pretty sure is the most of any receiver all season. 8 of his targets were deep. That's nuts. He had more deep work than a lot of guys had targets this week. That led to 157 yards and a touchdown. After Hill, Sammy Watkins had 9 targets. Travis Kelce had 7. Watkins had 2 empty deep targets. Kelsey had 1. Again, Tyreek Hill had 8. Demarcus Robinson and Damian Williams had 5 targets. Nobody else had multiple. Since Sammy Watkins' return, the target shares are 31% for Tyreek Hill, 23% for Sammy Watkins, and 20% for Travis Kelsey. Nobody else is above 10%. Hill in this sample has 56% of the air yards. So based on these target shares, we're getting Mahomes with 3 clear stacking candidates, not necessarily spreading out as much. I know that Mahomes wasn't active for all of these, but if they're going to funnel targets to those 3, that's pretty nuts. After a 72% snap rate last week and LaShawn McCoy's being a healthy scratch, Damian Williams played 78% of the snaps this week. He had 5 targets and 19 carries. So if we're getting 70% of the snaps from one back in this offense, as well as the concentrated targets, I mean, this is going to be a fantastic offense. It already is and always has been a great offense, but that's going to be, again, just nuts. They do, unfortunately, play Monday night in Week 11 against the Chargers.
Yeah. Tyreek Hill had as many targets as the Titans did, which I violated my never Titans rule, which was disappointing. I hate this passing offense, and they reminded me why. So I had a lot of Jonnu, and I had enough A.J. Brown for it to hurt, is the way I'd phrase that. Let's talk about Damian Williams, because LaShawn McCoy was a healthy scratch, but the way that Andy Reid phrased it was that it was load management. And if we were to believe that, it would say that Williams' role may not be all that sticky going forward, but it could also just be Andy Reid trying not to tick off LaShawn McCoy. So I think that there are 2 ways to view this, but overall, what's your view of Damian Williams going forward based on McCoy being inactive and based on the usage Williams got during this game, including good usage even after he lost a fumble that was returned for a touchdown?
Yeah, so McCoy, I think, played like
11%. 5. Yeah, it was 6 total snaps last week.
Yeah. So if that was load management, I don't know. But what this could mean is that LaShawn McCoy could be active, say, next week, and they kind of split work, and then maybe McCoy's out again, and then we get Damian Williams at a lower salary because he's sharing work one week, and then he gets unleashed for a 75% snap rate. So if McCoy plays, I'll be a little bit hesitant about Williams, but not so much where I wouldn't use him.
Yeah, I was going to use him even under the assumption that LaShawn McCoy is going to be active. I just increased my exposure to him with McCoy being inactive. And I think that that's probably the way to handle it going forward. We can still use him if McCoy is active, but we should be more into him if McCoy is inactive. I think he's like, if LaShawn McCoy were inactive, I'd pay like $7,500 to this guy. Like that's how valuable it is, because they're going to get Eric Fisher, their left tackle, back soon too. He returned to practice last week. He's going to be back soon, and this offense is going to blow up.
Yeah, I mean, you give me, again, 75% of the snaps from a back who gets receiving work in this offense. That's the price you got to pay.
Absolutely. Now, with NBA season finally upon us, Numberfire Premium has everything you need to dominate the competition. Whether you're betting on college or NBA games or building lineups for DFS, Premium has you covered. Best of all, get your first month of any of our premium packages, normally as much as $49.99, for just $9.99 when you sign up today with promo code WINNER, exclusively for HeatCheck listeners. That is promo code WINNER. Visit numberfire.com/premium for more details. Speaking of winners, not the New Orleans Saints, it's the Atlanta Falcons with the big win in week number 10 over their rivals. The Saints were finally healthy for the first time since week 1. And they laid a complete egg at home against Atlanta. Kudos to the Falcons. That was awesome. Good for them. But that's wild. Drew Brees finished with negative 9.79 passing net expected points. And he took 6 sacks. Behind that offensive line, that's pretty insane. For the full season, Brees is at 0.19 passing net expected points per dropback, which is above average. But it's still crazy weird that this happened. Teams have bad games, so we shouldn't overvalue this performance. It was just super surprising. Alvin Kamara came back and played 78% of the snaps, but they didn't run all that much because of the script. Kamara had 4 carries and 10 targets, while Latavius Murray had 5 carries and 2 targets. The script was very much so set up better for Kamara than Murray, so the snap rate shouldn't alleviate any concerns that Kamara's role will go down off the injury. I'm thinking it'll probably be about a 65-35 split going forward. And this game didn't really do much to change that. So I would guess the running back carry share will probably be about even 50-50, but Kamara will get more targets, and that's why he'll still be viable. But I don't think this game alleviated concerns about Kamara's workload. Michael Thomas predictably dominated the targets and caught everything because that's what he does. He had 14 overall targets, 2 were deep, 2 were in the red zone. He is one of the guys whose volume is so good that it creates upside even without explosive plays. He had over 20 points without a touchdown, which you can't really do at wide receiver. So keep the course with him. He's nuts. Outside of Kamara's 10 targets, Jared Cook was the only guy other than Thomas with more than 3. He had 10. Ted Ginn had 3. Traquan Smith had 2. Ginn is still in play, but I think we should move Cook higher on our list among the tertiary pieces going forward. It's also worth noting that Traquan outsnapped Ted Ginn and ran 3 more routes than Ginn. So keep an eye on Traquan. We might want to move him above Ted Ginn, but I think that Jared Cook is above both as of right now. One injury to monitor here is that Marshawn Lattimore left with a thigh injury, and he was in and out of the locker room. If he were to miss time, it'd be a definite downgrade for the Saints defense and an upgrade for their opponents, and they're facing Tampa Bay next week. So that will be one to monitor for sure. For the Falcons, Devontae Freeman suffered a foot injury and couldn't return. They just put Ito Smith on injured reserve, so this could open up a door for a big role for Brian Hill. Hill had 20 carries and 2 targets. Kenyon Barner and Quadri Olison would also likely mix in, given how the Falcons use their running backs, but Hill would definitely be a guy to monitor if Freeman misses time, because this offense is still good, as they showed again on Sunday. The Falcons threw only 35 times with 32 targeted throws, so the passing volume was, for them at least, a bit muted and spread out. Julio Jones had 9 targets. Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, and Austin Hooper all had 5. Julio's at 27% of the targets in 2 games without Mohamed Sanu. Then it's Gage, Devontae, Hooper, and Ridley, all between 15% and 18%. Julio's averaging 3.5 deep targets per game. Calvin Ridley is the only other guy with more than 1. I think that Julio might deserve a bump up with Sanu being gone. His salary does reflect that, but we know what he can do with 26-ish% of the market share. So I think it's arrow up on Julio Jones right now. As for Gage, he played 62% of the snaps. That's up from 58% the previous week, but he ran around on 36 of 36 dropbacks, which is very interesting. I think that we need to treat Gage in the same way we treated Sanu, though maybe with a slight downgrade. It doesn't look like Ridley and Hooper will get a major upgrade at all. So arrow up on Julio and Russell Gage, things slightly down from an expectation perspective on Hooper and Ridley. And Hooper also got banged up during the game, so we'll have to monitor that throughout the week, as it would be a negative for Matt Ryan, but likely a plus for guys like Calvin Ridley. Brandon, let's talk here about Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. My concerns around the workload were not alleviated based on what happened in week number 10. What is your assessment of these two now that we do have at least 1 week of sample on them playing together again?
Yeah, like you, I don't think that this particular script does anything to show us what we should expect in a neutral script at all, or a positive script, which is kind of, I mean, that's what I'm more concerned about. If it's really positive script, how are they going to use Kamara? I mean, do they need to use him? Is it like to that degree? Are they trying to keep it even no matter what? We don't know. And I was hoping to get some, as heavy favorites, I thought, see how obvious in relation to Alvin Kamara, just not the case. So I'm still kind of taking a wait and see approach. I'll still use Alvin Kamara for sure, depending on Latavius Murray's price. Yeah. I can't use him against the Buccaneers because the matchup's just so bad. It's one of the few rushing matchups where it's just like I am not using him. But yeah, I'm with you. Like I still don't have that answer.
So name me that salary for Alvin Kamara on the road next week against Tampa Bay. They are 5-point favorites, but it is on the road.
52-point favorite, or 52-point. Sorry.
That is some Ohio State Rutgers stuff there.
No, FanDuel Sportsbook just populated and bumped me down, and I'm assuming it's because the Bills and Dolphins, they're on there now. So
cool.
It threw me off. For Kamara, 77.
Yeah, I was going to say that's 75. I think that's because I just don't. This offense is not, the touchdown expectation in the offense is not as high when they leave the Superdome. I know that Tampa Bay stinks, but the touchdown expectation is not as high. So for next week on the road against Tampa Bay, Kamara is 78. Appropriate. I think that's very fine. Michael Thomas is 9,000. I also think that's appropriate and fine. That is okay. I think that Kamara,
How many targets is he going to get against that front?
Michael Thomas?
No. Well, I guess Michael Thomas too. But
I was going to say 30.
if they don't just run the ball into that line, I mean, Kamara is probably like 10 plus targets.
I would say that his target expectation is similar to what I had for Golden Tate entering the week, which was between 8 and 13. So he's basically Golden Tate with some rushing at that point, I would say. I don't know if he's got the same moves as Golden Tate, but we'll find out next week. Speaking of the Bucs, let's move on here to the Cardinals at the Bucs. This game was expected to be good. It was good. And outside of the Bucs receivers, predictable good things happened, specifically Christian Kirk being a monster. What'd you see in this game, Brandon?
Yeah, this was a good one. 57 total points, 92 pass attempts, 29 deep attempts, 682 total passing yards. I'll start with the Bucs because they did win, and that matters. So I'm sure that everyone listening, for Jameis out there eating the W, I'll talk about you first, even though weren't particularly efficient. 0.01 passing net expected points per dropback, well below the league average of about 0.11. I still had 358 yards, only 1 touchdown, 2 picks. The target leaders here: 12 for Chris Godwin, 8 for Ronald Jones, 6 for Mike Evans, 7 for O.J. Howard, and nobody else had more than 4. Despite half the targets of Godwin, Evans had 123 air yards. Godwin had 103. In 3 games, over the past 3 games, Evans leads with 562 air yards, which is 42%. Godwin has 244, which is 18% on 5 fewer total targets. Evans has an average target depth of 16.5 yards downfield in that span. Godwin's is 8.4. Godwin is, probably the better bet to see as many or more targets than Evans, but I'm still going to prioritize Evans because of all of the deep work. He leads the NFL with 33 deep targets, twice as many as Godwin has. Hopefully, Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, I don't want to say that, but if Marshawn Lattimore's out, then
right, he needs a rest.
Yeah. Get well soon, Marshawn.
Yes.
Just maybe give us Mike Evans week. O.J. Howard returned from the grave as the Undertaker gif.
I saw like 6 different consecutive tweets that were all an Undertaker gif. So I think we got to find a new thing.
I figured that was the go-to. He ran every pass route according to Pro Football Focus. I have to double check that, but that's what it looked like when I checked yesterday. He had 2 deep targets, 7 total targets, did score. It was a plus matchup against the NFL's worst tight end defense. I'm not going to go overboard on him if the price really spikes, but we know how athletic he is and what he can do in this high-volume offense. Ronald Jones, again, had 8 targets, which is definitely a thing. He ran 25 pass routes this week after 18 last week, which was a new career high. He did split 22 carries with Peyton Barber, who also scored on the ground. Jones had just 29 yards on his 11 carries, an 18% rushing success rate, according to Numberfire. Volume matters more, so I'm thinking 50-50 rushing split with the lead in targets. I mean, I guess we just kind of put that on Alvin Kamara, but I don't think that that's the same. I'm thinking more like Royce Freeman. I could be lower. The offense will score more, but
I don't think that's a bad comp.
That's kind of how I'm viewing it. I don't think that he's going to have a significant rushing market share lead over Peyton Barber.
Especially because Barber was the more effective rusher yesterday, too.
No, yeah. Jones did play 51% of the snaps. Barber was at 29%, but Barber's still probably going to steal a lot of the rushes. The arrow is pointing up on Jones for me. He's not without concerns. They host the Saints next week. I'm sure we'll talk about that game plenty on Thursday. For the Cardinals, Patrick Peterson left with a calf injury that seemed bad, but I don't have an update yet, so I'll have to track that. Kyler Murray had really poor efficiency here, but still accumulated 324 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Ran 3 times for 38 yards. He's a very good fantasy quarterback. He has a really tough stretch of games coming up, so we'll probably talk a lot about him down the stretch as well. But this was Christian Kirk week. Came through 10 targets, 138 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Larry Fitzgerald, by comparison, had 8 targets. Kenyon Drake had 7. Pharaoh Cooper had 5, though one of them was on a fake punt, which is just a weird play. It was fun, but it was weird. Kirk had 6 deep targets. Cooper had 4. Fitzgerald had 3. So in 3 games since returning for Kirk, He has a 27% target share with 39% of the air yards. Fitzgerald's at 16% with 9% of the air yards. Kirk is the dude in this offense. He has been pretty much all season, especially now that he's healthy. He's pretty hard to use right now with his usage. There really wasn't a third receiver who played significant snaps. Keyshawn Johnson played 52%, Andy Isabella 39%, Farrell Cooper 27%. The backfield here is a much more interesting conversation. David Johnson played 44% of the snaps according to Pro Football Focus, 24 from the backfield, 5 from the slot. Kenyon Drake, 65% of the snaps, 38 snaps in the backfield, 5 as a receiver. So that's something. Kenyon Drake had 10 carries. Johnson had 5. Drake again had 7 targets. Johnson had 1. Drake has a 17% target share in 2 games with the Cardinals. This really points to Drake. I'm going to hesitate because someone as good as David Johnson's lingering. We don't know if he's just getting healthier. We don't know what the deal is. But for me, the arrow's way up on Christian Kirk. To a lesser degree, up on Kenyon Drake. But they do play at San Francisco in Week 11, the second matchup in 3 weeks for them. But San Francisco at least will be on a short week.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I don't know what to do that backfield because, like, Johnson looked bad and then basically got benched, like, later in the game. Like, he didn't play very much down the stretch. And, like, I think we can agree that he's not someone we're going to trust in DFS until, like, we get a reason to trust him again. But Kenyon Drake, can you go at him or no?
I think I could, just probably not against the 49ers. Although we did see him, like, he got a ton of targets in that game.
But he also played 80% of the snaps. Will he play 80% next week?
No.
Right.
Maybe.
No, I wouldn't think so, I guess. I don't know.
I don't think so, but we don't know what they're doing with David Johnson. Like, we don't know what the deal is. He could be hurt. He could be more hurt than we know. I don't know. So I tend to shy away from those situations. But so what would you pay for Drake? Like, what would he have to be for you to play him?
He'd have to be really low, like 6,000, and he's not going to be that. Nor should he be, honestly. But, like, I just don't know what his role is going to be, and that's so
63.
Hard. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I can maybe consider that. What about Christian Kirk? Because he's had a really good role since coming back. He actually had a good role before he got hurt, too. So, like, for the whole year, Christian Kirk's been awesome. And the problem is that he didn't do a whole lot in the one game against San Francisco. It's a repeat matchup, divisional game. They just saw each other 2 weeks ago. That's not a great situation, but it's 2 high-paced offenses to help mitigate that. So a lot of conflicting signals. Name that salary for Christian Kirk next week.
So I had in my mind 65. It's not that high. So
okay, I was thinking higher. Because I think that is.
I'm accounting for the match. The matchup's just.
Okay, fair. I think accounting for the matchup, 65 is correct. Yeah. But he is 62.
Yeah, if he were playing like a scrub defense, like 7,000. Yeah, with what he's been getting. Yeah, easily.
Exactly. No, based on his role, I would agree with that. So arrows up on Christian Kirk. We liked him heading into the week. He was awesome. So that's something we can trust. I think that your comp of Ronald Jones being Royce Freeman in a better offense is probably pretty accurate. So no complaints there. And Bucs guys are what they are. So let's move on here to the Giants at the Jets. And I think that it's just good to accept that the Jets are a volatile offense. And volatile offenses sometimes hit the high end of their range of outcomes. We should keep that in mind. When evaluating them going forward, they're not always going to be duds. Sam Darnold gained 0.23 passing net expected points per dropback at home in a good matchup. That's what you expect. So this is a team we can go to in the right spots. You probably just don't want to go there in cash games because their spikes might not be all that predictable. Le'Veon Bell had some work taken off his plate due to a knee injury, but his usage was still fine. He had 18 carries and 4 targets while playing 74% of the snaps. He injured his ribs, so he was not in on the final drive, but it doesn't sound all that serious. I'd keep an eye on the practice reports. If Le'Veon starts to practice in full again, then we can go back to him. If not, they're probably going to keep giving Bilal Powell and Ty Montgomery some work every now and then. So check out Le'Veon's practice participation and judge him based on that. Demaryius Thomas led the way with 9 targets, and Jamison Crowder was second with 6. This was their first game with Chris Herndon back, so adds another mouth into the fold. In Darnold's 5 games back, Crowder leads with 22% of the targets. Demaryius Thomas is second at 20%, and then it's Robbie Anderson at 19%. Robbie has averaged 2.6 deep targets per game. Then it's Demaryius at 2.2. Crowder has 1.2. I'm going to put Crowder first because he's coming through on his volume and he's getting looks in the red zone too. I'm going to keep Robbie second over Demaryius, but I'm still bumping him down. I think the gap between him and Demaryius is getting smaller for me. There's not enough overall volume there for me to feel great about him, even in tournaments. So slight downgrade to Robbie, slight bump up to Jamison Crowder. Saquon Barkley got an X-ray after the game. It was never reported on what body part, which is weird. He did grab his leg at one point, and it was not the leg that he hurt earlier. And there was also talk about a shoulder injury, so I don't know. But it does help explain why he was so ineffective, in addition to the offensive line injuries. But his volume was still fine. He had 13 carries and 5 targets, just not the efficiency. They were missing their starting center and their right tackle entering the game, and then their left tackle got concussed during the game. So thankfully their bye is this week. Keep an eye on the injuries. If those guys can't come back, it will hurt everybody. But it doesn't seem like long-term stuff. So this isn't a situation where we need to write them off completely. Just keep an eye on the injuries to the offensive line. With Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard out, the Giants actually did exactly as we expected, where they funneled looks to Darius Slayton and Golden Tate. Slayton had 13 targets, and Tate had 9. Both those guys scored twice. Daniel Jones didn't throw deep that much, likely because he was under pressure with the line being obliterated. So I wouldn't worry much about the lack of deep throws there. The Giants are on a bye. If they don't have Ingram and Shepard back after that bye, I would treat Tate and Slayton as being high floor, high upside options. And even when the line is healthy, we can still use defenses against Jones because he's playing well at times, but he's also making really, really dumb mistakes that are good for opposing defenses. So I think that it's pretty much status quo for me with regards to the Giants, outside of Saquon Barkley really needing to monitor that offensive line and his health as they come back from their bye week. Brandon, I do think that Jamison Crowder is a legitimate play. He's facing Washington next week. He used to play for Washington, and we know people don't tend to like that franchise, probably for good reason. But it's also going to be a low-pace game because Washington sucks the life out of everything. So name me that salary for Jamison Crowder next week on the road, revenge game against Washington.
Yeah, with a total of 37.5.
It might be too high.
So probably 6,000 in that particular game. It would be higher if it were a game that was not completely abysmal.
He'd be like, I think 67 if it were a normal game, like totally neutral game. In that game, I think 6,000 is right. I think that it's just, I don't want to use players facing Washington. But I think that the overall volume for Crowder is encouraging. He's 65. I don't think you need to prioritize him there by any means.
Well, you can stack that game.
What's that?
If you stack that game.
I'd rather not. Shockingly, we might get Darius Geis back for that game, which would be kind of fun. But it's going to be bad. They don't want to throw. They shouldn't want to throw. So it's just really hard to trust guys against Washington. I think with the Giants, just keep an eye on the injuries, specifically the offensive line and the pass catchers too, because they're beat up, and that does matter a lot for Saquon Barkley. Let's move now to the Dolphins at the Colts. Brandon, are the Dolphins going to make the playoffs? It's a question in the AFC.
They're swimming in wins. I mean, it's 2 in a row.
The tank has been busted.
I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what Ryan Fitzpatrick's doing. He lost 0.24 passing and expected points per dropback here. Did run for a touchdown. We'll have to see what his status is, but the line is posted, so we would assume that everything is good to go for Week 11. Without Preston Williams and Mark Walton, the Dolphins did feature Devontae Parker and Kalen Ballage. Ballage had 20 carries for 43 yards, along of 7, a rushing success rate of 20%. He lost 7 net expected points on the ground. It's very bad. but he had 20 carries and 4 targets while playing 85% of the snaps. It's a really great workload despite the lack of production. The issue is always going to be the offense. You put that workload in a better offense, he's going to be someone that we would want to play on FanDuel.
But kudos to Kalen Ballage for being committed to the tank. We've seen the Dolphins playing hard in general. Maybe he's playing hard, but he's committed. And I think that the organizational philosophy aligns well with Kalen Ballage's playing style.
This one's hard for me because I liked Ballage as a prospect coming out.
I shouldn't talk bad about him. I'm sorry. I get mad if people talk bad about Jared Goff, who I like coming out. So Kalen Ballage is great, and you were right.
I mean, there were a lot of red flags surrounding Kalen Ballage, but I thought maybe he could overcome it. Hasn't done it yet, but yeah. I mean, that's a good snap rate. Devontae Parker had 10 of 33 targets. Mike Gesicki had 6. Ballage and Allen Hurns had 4. Albert Wilson had 3. The air yards were 120 for Devontae Parker, 39 for Allen Hurns, 29 for Gesicki, and nobody else with more than 6. Parker, similar to Ballage, has a really good role in a terrible offense. We just take that for what it's worth. They host Buffalo next week, so probably out on everyone again.
Oh, no. Who do you think has had the best passing net expected points per dropback against Buffalo this year?
I'm assuming it's Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Fitzmagic, baby. I believe it's a revenge game. I think most games he plays are revenge games.
Yeah, it's a revenge game.
Yeah, so we have to keep that in mind. But I think 100% Ryan Fitzpatrick next week would not be a terrible idea. Okay, sorry, 98%. You can have one share each of Lamar and Deshaun. The rest should be Ryan Fitzpatrick.
All right.
I stand by it.
The Colts, I'm having a hard time kind of standing by with Brian Hoyer. Didn't get it done in a very, very good matchup. 204 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 picks on 39 attempts. A really interesting usage for Eric Ebron, who had 12 targets, team high 56 yards. Zach Pascal, Nyheim Hines had 7 targets. Jack Doyle, Chester Rogers had 4. Doyle scored. Hoyer threw deep 12 times. He tends to be above average in target depth, which is of note. Ebron had 5 deep targets. That is a lot for him. Pascal and Rogers had 3. The past 2 games with Hoyer, Ebron has 14 targets. Again, 12 were on Sunday. Good for a 22% target share. Pascal's at 11. Hines is at 10. Rogers is at 9. Doyle's at 8. So kind of spreading it around a good bit, which is not good whenever the efficiency is not really there. Marlon Mack, I finally played some Marlon Mack this week, and what should have been a smash spot was not. Blew up the other direction. 19 carries, 1 target, 74 yards and no touchdowns, 82 total yards, no touchdowns. I mean, that's certainly in Marlon Mack's range of outcomes, especially with Brian Hoyer under center and just no receiving work. I understand that a half-point PPR site gives you half a point for a catch, and a PPR site gives you 1 point for a catch, but there's no yardage, no touchdown opportunities on receptions if you're not involved in the passing game. So that's always my issue with Marlon Mack. And he also played 46% of snaps here. It was pretty much the worst case for him. Next week, the Colts host the Jaguars, who are coming off a bye.
So Marlon Mack, his target work is 0-3-3-0-3-3-1-0-1. That means he has 2 total targets the past 3 games. The reason that I was more okay with him in the past is because I thought that there was a potential for him to get 3 or so targets. And it's not desirable as a number, but it's also not it's not Sony Michel, which is good. And I think that's gone away, especially given the snap rate that he had yesterday. And I was underweight on him yesterday because of the Hoyer concern, but I think this whole offense is just really, really bad without him, which maybe means we were undervaluing Jacoby Brissett before, which is interesting. But with Eric Ebron, you mentioned he had 5 deep targets. He had 6 deep targets the entire year entering Sunday. And he had a meeting with Frank Reich apparently before the game to complain about his role. So may have seen a little bit of a squeaky wheel narrative there. But it's just so hard for me to trust anybody in this offense, given he also outsnapped Jack Doyle 43-42. Interesting. But I think it's also probably due to the script. But I think that it's just really going to be hard to trust anybody here when you're missing your quarterback and your all-star wide receiver.
Yeah, and this is just it's a situation where the best case scenario for these guys is not so good that you have to kind of
Your
have
best case scenario is they don't
FOMO,
bust.
basically.
Yeah.
Like whenever you get into a situation where the best case scenario for the Colts is not that enticing, like
Yeah.
you don't have to be afraid not to have Marlon Mack in your lineup.
Basically, you just have to hope they don't have 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. Oh, wait, that's what Derrick Henry did yesterday. I'm not still mad about it, but I'm still kind of mad about it. Like, with guys like that, you need them to have 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. If you think they can get that, cool. But what are the odds they get that on a given week? Not that high, and you should treat your exposure based on trying to calculate those odds. They get to those numbers in your head. 125, 2 touchdowns. That's the way I would view that. Let's move on here to the Panthers at the Packers. And Aaron Jones had another big day with 3 touchdowns, but he did it on just 13 carries and no targets. Jamal Williams had 13 carries and 1 target. Jones and Williams both played 50% of the snaps, and Jones still ran a good number of routes. He just didn't get any targets for the first time all season. He had 4 targets in 6 consecutive games prior to that. His passing game role may take a ding with Davante Adams being back, which would certainly lower him. So I would say the way to look at Jones is likely this. Do you think there will be enough juice in his 13-ish carries and 5-ish targets for him to pay off? Sometimes, like Sunday, the answer will be yes. I knew this was a concern for Aaron Jones on Sunday and still used him because there was a lot of value in those touches because he was at home, a 5.5-point favorite against a bad rush defense. If he's in situations like that, you should use him, but he's not a cash game option, and the floor is always going to be shaky. So it's kind of the similar thing where, like, what are the odds that he pays off based on this volume? Because we know what the volume's going to be. 13-ish carries, 5-ish targets. If there's enough juice in that for him to pay off, use him. If there's not, don't. Davante Adams, no question marks around him. He had 10 targets. That puts him at a 28% target share in the games he has played. He had 4 deep targets and 2 in the red zone. He is on the verge of a blow-up, and it should happen pretty soon. They have a bye and then are facing San Francisco, but the big days for Davante are going to come. Geronimo Allison played the second most snaps at wide receiver, but Allen Lazard had twice as many targets with 6. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is dust. So we can finally cross him off for now. If you're on a short slate and need to use a second Packer besides Davante or Aaron Jones or Jamal Williams, that would be a 4th Packer, but whatever. It would be Allen Lazard for me. Christian McCaffrey paid off his high salary. He had 20 carries and 7 targets. That is 34 adjusted opportunities. And the reason that I was wary of him a bit was because he wasn't getting targets. The 7 targets for him were his most since week 5. His snap rate also bounced back up. He played every snap. So the score likely dictated part of his usage the past 2 games. This still isn't the highest upside offense with Kyle Allen, but I think that that's the only nit you can really pick here is that they're not going to score 40 points unless they're facing the Falcons, which they are next week. Curtis Samuel scored, but DJ Moore continued to get great usage. Moore had 10 targets. That is his 3rd time with double-digit targets in the past 4 games, and he had 9 in the other. Since McCaffrey's passing game usage has declined, Moore has 29% of the team's targets. Samuel is at 23%, and Greg Olsen is at 18%. Moore also has 3 deep targets in 4 straight games. Samuel has had 1 more than Moore in that time. So basically, they're both getting fed. I'd expect Moore to have a really good showing very soon. He's had good showings, but a better showing, like a blow-up game, is in his future. They get the Falcons next, so it could be next week. It is worth noting that Olsen has 4 deep targets the past 2 games as well. Kyle Allen is struggling, but he's letting it rip a bit more, and that's good for all 3 of those guys. And it allows us to check out Olsen when spending down at tight end. So I think that everyone here was encouraging. From a usage perspective for Carolina, and Brandon, I already looked. I cheated. Christian McCaffrey is the exact same salary for next week. So I think we just shovel him in cash games and figure out the rest, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Like, my concerns about him for this game were decreased snap rate, decreased passing down usage, and low touchdown expectation for the offense. 2 of those concerns were alleviated, and 1 will be alleviated by facing the Falcons. So I have no concerns about him in that spot.
Well, I was going to say the Falcons might be the 85 Bears now. So.
Yeah. Forgot about that. But yeah, I think it's full steam ahead here.
What about Samuel and Moore? How do you view them?
So I view Samuel as being above Moore. Or sorry, Moore above Samuel. My bad. I misspoke there. So DJ Moore is getting 29% of the targets. He is getting deep work. Like, that's a $7,000 wide receiver. I don't really have any concerns about him. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to put Moore over Samuel. I think it's close enough where you can't really hate either one.
Sure. Yeah.
But next week, I kind of just view them almost just the same pricing the same, more or less.
Yeah.
So I had 6,600 in my head. That's kind of where I am with them.
Yeah, I think that's like appropriate. Like, they were in the Moore was 58 and Samuel 63. Moore is 6,000 and Samuel is 63. Cool.
Yeah.
Like, no concerns there. I think that's great. Greg Olsen is 51 again. Sweet. Like, if they're going to get this usage, count me in.
Yeah, so the difference, like, DJ Moore at 6,000 is cash game consideration. If he were like 7,000, I would play a lot of him in tournaments and stacks, but I would probably not get there in cash games. But
yeah,
I'll just play DJ Moore again.
Yep, happily doing the same here. Let's move on here to the Rams at the Steelers. Ugly game, and not a lot of good stuff for fantasy either. Was there anything good for fantasy? No, there wasn't. Okay, talk me through this game because it was bad.
Yeah, I feel like I had like one good fantasy game to talk about, and that was the
Cardinals Bucks.
Yeah. Oh well. Jalen Samuels week part 2 was underwhelming again. I mean, the usage was fine: 14 carries, 7 targets, 60% of the snaps, but just turned that into 40 total yards and no touchdowns. So, I mean, even if James Conner continues to miss, Samuels has not been given that workhorse treatment that we've seen him have in games past. The offense just not good enough to go super hard at Samuels with no concerns. Mason Rudolph was 22 of 28 for 242 yards and 1 touchdown with poor efficiency. So he just hasn't been good enough for us to buy into this offense heavily. He spread out the targets as well. Seven for Jalen Samuels, Vance McDonald, and James Washington, who did score. 6 for Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, 3 for Trey Edmonds. The deep targets were 3 for Vance McDonald, 2 for Deontay Johnson and James Washington, and 1 for Juju Smith-Schuster. Since Mason Rudolph returned 3 weeks ago, the target shares are 18% for Juju Smith-Schuster and Jalen Samuels at the top, but that doesn't actually include Week 8 for Samuels, so that means, his target share in those past 2 games is the highest, but trying to look at that full sample for the receivers. So the lead target getter is still Juju, but he's below 20% in those 3 games. They just haven't used him a lot. I'm not saying his matchups have always been great, but they just kind of treat him as another guy, which is pretty strange. Vance McDonald, James Washington, and Deontay Johnson pretty much all clustered behind them in targets, so it's kind of like an equal opportunity offense, and Rudolph's just not good enough for that kind of target share. Washington has a third of the deep targets in this 3-game sample. Juju's at 25%. I just don't know how you can feel confident with any of the pass catchers in this offense. They play the Browns on Thursday night, so we don't have to deal with them on the main slate. For the Rams, Jared Goff left briefly with a hip injury. He was not great. We talked about it at the top of the show. On the road against a team that can't get pressure, no Brandon Cooks, the offensive line not doing him many favors. There's no need to panic, but Jared Goff is a very matchup-dependent quarterback, but so are a lot of quarterbacks. So I got your back, Jim, with regards to Jared Goff. Cooper Kupp, though, got absolutely erased on 4 targets. I don't have that data on the matchup yet. I know Mike Hilton's very good in the slot, so I don't know if every target was against Hilton, but Kupp did not get a catch, which is very strange. The targets instead flowed through Gerald Everett, who had 12, Robert Woods, who had 11. Josh Reynolds had 5, followed by Kupp and Todd Gurley and Tyler Higbee with 4. Reynolds, I think, played every snap based on Pro Football Focus numbers. Everett played 75% of the snaps. It's good to see some life, though, from Robert Woods, who does have a 20% target share on the season. With no Brandon Cooks, I mean, he didn't really have hardly anything in his peripherals to get excited about. So maybe he'll trend back up down the stretch. Cooper Kupp is down to a 26% target share with single-digit targets in 3 of his past 4 games. He had averaged 12.6 targets through week 5, just 7.0 since then. In the right spots, Kupp, Woods, Reynolds, and Everett are all viable to different degrees. It just really depends on the matchup. The running back carries here were 12 for Todd Gurley, 5 for Malcolm Brown, 4 for Darrell Henderson. Gurley, though, played 79% of the snaps. 9 of 55 snaps for him were in the slot as well. So that gives him snap rates of 61%, 52%, and 79% the past 3 games. So maybe he got a little bit rested up after the bye. Maybe it was just a game. We don't know. But I think the arrow is pointing back up on Todd Gurley a little bit, especially with Malcolm Brown playing 17% of the snaps and Darrell Henderson playing 10%. So I think probably trending back up for Gurley. They host the Bears for Sunday Night Football, not on the main slate. So I guess neither of these teams are actually on the main slate.
Yeah, you said no reason to panic with the Rams. I might actually disagree with that. If their center, Brian Allen, misses time, he left that game with a knee injury and got carted off. They've only had 2 offensive linemen play well this year. One is Brian Allen at center, been decent. And then their left tackle, Andrew Whitworth. Everyone else has been bad this year. And if you take away one of the only good pieces in that offensive line, it's very hard for me to expect Jared Goff to be good. And that's not as a result of him. It's a result of the situation around him. And I value situation a lot for quarterbacks, which is why I didn't wind up having any Daniel Jones yesterday. He was great, but I can't use quarterbacks in bad situations. If Allen misses time, Jared Goff will be in a bad situation. Now, they've got Austin Blythe. They've got Austin Corbett. They've got guys who know how to play center, but you're just downgrading different spots on the offensive line. So I would actually be very worried. I agree with you that Gurley's role is better, but I still worry about the efficiency, and he still hasn't been getting targets. He had 4 this time, which is fine, but I'm pretty worried about this entire offense. And it's troublesome because I think the people I don't know. It's hard for me to expect them to rebound when they keep losing good players.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, I guess.
Yeah.
With regards to the offense, I mean, they're actually not on the main slate until week 13.
Thank goodness.
We don't have to be enticed by them on the main slate. We'll just have to take stabs on, fuller slates, single games, stuff like that. So,
and hopefully Cooks and Allen are back by that time, because if they are, then my concerns are alleviated. They're back to what they were before. But if they aren't, then it's concerning. Yeah,
so like I said, it depends on the matchup. But the Bears, not the right matchup for me to go heavy at the Rams anyway.
Right, exactly. So hopefully Allen is okay. Hopefully Cooks is okay personally, more importantly, than a football player. But if they can get those guys back, I'll buy back in. But I probably won't until one of them, likely Allen, comes back. Let's move on here to the Vikings at the Cowboys. Pretty fun game all the way around. Just a bunch of disgusting catches. But the Vikings got the win. And Dalvin Cook, shocker, was a big part of that. He had 97 rushing yards and 86 receiving. He did it on 40 adjusted opportunities. He's a beast. He's behind only McCaffrey in the running back pecking order right now. I don't know who else you'd put above Dalvin Cook. He's awesome outside of McCaffrey. Unfortunately, Stephon Diggs didn't seem to benefit with Adam Thielen being out. He had 6 targets. That was second behind Cook. Irv Smith actually had 6 as well, and Kyle Rudolph had 5. Rudolph had 2 red zone targets, both touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion. Smith had 2 red zone targets as well for the second straight game, and Smith's snap rate was 74%. It hadn't been higher than 64% in a game this year. He's kind of like Dallas Goedert right now. His snap rate's gone up in games with Thielen out, so if Thielen misses more time, Irv Smith is actually in play as a tight end, and I would not be shocked if they go more to tight end when Thielen is back. As for Diggs, he'll probably pop back up when Thielen is back, and he can have big games without Thielen too, but defenses are clearly going to make covering him priority, and that does matter. We should treat Olabisi Johnson as being a lesser option than the 2 tight ends if Thielen continues to sit. So Diggs 1, Rudolph 2A, Smith 2B among the pass catchers in this offense until Thielen gets back. Dak Prescott was awesome yet again, just like he has been all year. He finished with 0.47 passing net expected points per dropback, very much above average. And he's been one of the best quarterbacks in football this year, and it seems like it's going to stick. we should be high on this offense, and Prescott is great for fantasy as well. Hopefully they let him throw in key situations, because why wouldn't you? Zeke Elliott was kind of the one dud here. He had 20 carries and 3 targets. The carries are fine, and his efficiency will go up there, but the 3 targets are concerning. We'll talk more about that in a second. Amari Cooper had 14 targets. Michael Gallup had 10, and Randall Cobb had 8. They threw 44 times, which helps, but they do keep it pretty tight. In the 3 games since Cobb returned from injury, Cooper has 25% of the overall targets. Gallup is at 19%. Cobb is at 18%. Jason Witten has 17%. And Zeke Elliott is all the way down at 10% of the targets in that time. We need passing game work for a running back to truly be in the top tier for fantasy, and Dalvin Cook showed why, because he got so many extra yards as a receiver. Zeke is not getting that right now, and it was a problem earlier in the year for fantasy too. He can get targets, and that means something, but we should downgrade him and make sure we're not putting him in the same tier as McCaffrey and Cook. He is still in that second tier. Like, I don't want to downgrade him too much, but I think that it's worth noting he was not what he was in the second half of last year. As for the receivers, Amari Cooper also has 45% of the deep targets since Cobb came back, so he is a top-end receiver in football. I think that from a usage perspective, he's pretty similar to Julio Jones, and I mean that in a flattering way. So treat him in a similar fashion to Julio. I would still rank Gallup ahead of Cobb, but Cobb gets a bump up. Gallup gets a slight bump down. Jason Witten is an option if they're going to score a ton of points, but the receivers are the way to go here. The Vikings get Denver at home next week. The Cowboys go on the road to face Detroit, which could be an interesting game if Matthew Stafford's able to go. But Brandon, I want to talk to you about Zeke, because we've talked about his passing game work several times here, and it's not an issue that has gone away, especially when they've had all of Cooper, Gallup, and Cobb healthy. Where do you put Zeke in kind of like the running back lexicon? I don't know what the right way to phrase this, because I think that it's McCaffrey tier 1, Dalvin Cook tier 2, and they're by themselves in those respective tiers. I think that Zeke is in a glob for that third tier.
Yep, I'll put him in the glob.
I don't know how else to phrase it.
He's a glob guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's actually what I was thinking. I was like, what's McCaffrey 1, Cook 2? I don't know exactly where I'd put everyone else, like if I had to rank that glob, but he's part of that with the lack of receiving work. It's just like, it's not the same Zeke that we saw with Amari Cooper. Like when they had Amari Cooper last year and they added him. Yeah,
Zeke's passing usage went up.
Yeah, went up like crazy, and it's not there, and that's what kind of elevates these different backs to outside the glob, the receiving work.
Exactly. Like that's why we want McCaffrey and we want Dalvin Cook. Because they're going to get receiving yardage, and Zeke's not getting that right now. Name that salary for Zeke on the road against Detroit next week.
I'm trying to find the total.
I think it was. Oh, I think there isn't one because of Stafford.
Oh yeah, that's. I'm struggling because I was way low on Josh Jacobs, but it's like 78 probably.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Like, I think he's still worth. Like, Saquon Barkley was 86 this past week, and I was willing to pay that. But Saquon gets a bit more passing down usage than Zeke. So I think that, like, 8,000 is probably correct for Zeke, and he's 84. Like, I'll use that. But, like, there are paths to him not paying off at that salary without the passing down work.
Yeah. It's also going to depend on, I mean, we have Dalvin Cook on that slate. McCaffrey.
We have McCaffrey. Like, I think that it's just hard to prioritize Zeke when I have Dalvin at $200 more is a way better option. McCaffrey at $2,100 more, way better option, price considered. I think that the question would be, do you prefer Zeke or Josh Jacobs? And that's a tough one.
We get Fournette back.
Oh, hey. All right. Against Indy? Yeah, that works.
Yeah, so I mean, it's always hard. Like, it's knowing now that Josh Jacobs is 8,000. Like, I understand I was lower on him when I said 7,000. Realistically, I'd play him at like 75. I'll still play him at 8,000, but
right.
He's getting dangerously close to Dalvin Cook, and it's just like
right. Like,
that feels like a ton of Feels like a ton of regret going with settling for Jacobs instead of Cook.
It's $600 difference. Just go with Dalvin Cook. I think that's a very
Just
easy
punt
decision.
it, completely punt at defense if you have to, I guess. I don't know.
Are there any good options at defense next week? No, cheapest is 3,000. Oh well, we had a good run. But yeah, I think that Arrow's slightly down on Zeke. Or Dalvin Cook is awesome. I don't know what else to say. Amari Cooper's great. So I think I wish the Cowboys would use Zeke, but like they're being so efficient that it's hard for me to disagree. It's hard. I wish they'd use him in the passing game. I wish they would stop using him as a rusher. But with how efficient Dak has been, I am not gonna tell them what to do. They're being smart, from an efficiency perspective. Let Dak be awesome. Let him throw, and I think we hold off on Zeke. At least just lower him a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, that is all we have for this week. We'll be back with you on Thursday to get you set for the Week 11 DFS main slate. We're getting closer to Thanksgiving, too. Of course, we'll have a Thanksgiving preview podcast to break down those 3 games. To make sure you get those right as they are posted, make sure you subscribe to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you find it, you can find us. And while you're there, please leave a rating and review as well. Quick reminder, we are doing these now live on YouTube if you want to watch it earlier. The Monday recap podcast will be live on YouTube at 9 o'clock on the FanDuel YouTube page, and the Thursday preview podcast will be live at 10 o'clock, so you can schedule your watching around then if you want to catch it before it goes up. Brandon, people have questions for you on Twitter. Where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald for running the video side of things here for today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in, whether it be on YouTube or in the podcast feed. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again on Thursday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.